Holy cow, it's November already, and for a lot of farmers, that means downtime is either here or on the way. How do you make best use of that downtime? Stay tuned, coming up. Welcome to Grassfed Life. I'm your host, Diego, D-I-E-G-O. Today's episode of Grassfed Life is a special Thanksgiving episode. Farmer Darby Simpson and I are going to be talking about one of Darby's favorite topics that isn't farming related, board games. Yes, board games. What does that have to do with farming? Well, not so much on the surface, but maybe more than you think when you start digging below the surface. Because board games are a great way to de-stress, stop yourself from thinking about the business, bond and connect with people around you, and challenge your brain in different and new ways. Given that so many farmers are going to be having a lot of downtime coming up over the next few months, how are you going to spend that downtime? We're making the case that board games are a great way to do that. Let's jump right into it. It's the Thanksgiving Extravaganza Board Game Edition with farmer Darby Simpson. So I'm here today with farmer Darby Simpson, and today we're going to be talking board games with Black Friday coming up, with Christmas coming up. It's one of those times a year where a lot of farmers are starting to get some downtime, extended downtime as winter rolls in. When you think about downtime as a farmer, how important is it to use the downtime that you have, and how do you use your downtime, especially the downtime that's coming up here over the winter?
Man, once we get to Thanksgiving, we have a big mental shift because that really is like the end of our season. Like most Americans, we really enjoy Thanksgiving. It's a very special holiday. We go all out for the meal. It's 99% local. I mean, we make everything from scratch. It's stuff we get from other vendors at the farmers market, plus our turkey we raise. And that definitely, kind of kicks off downtime, extended downtime, particularly with family. And I guess like my one hobby that I really have, and this goes back to the late 90s. So going back 20 years is board games. And I'm not talking like, Monopoly and Yahtzee and stuff like that, but more European style board games. And I have, long had a love affair with those. I've taught that to my kids. My kids are old enough now that they can play all kinds of stuff with me. I still get together with my buddies a couple of times a year. We'll have day-long events, usually on New Year's Day. I get together with a large group of guys, generally speaking, the same group of guys for the past decade or so. And we'll start at like 8, 9 o'clock in the morning and go till, as late as midnight. So it might be 15 hours straight of board games and just eat food and hang out and have a good time. But this is, this is old school in the sense that like you get FaceTime with people. This isn't email. This is, video games and a microphone where you kind of get to know people in an online community. It's not a forum. This is, we're going to sit down at a table. We're going to physically interact with one another. We're going to interact conversationally. We're going to see what's going on in one another's lives. And I think that that's something that's been lost in our society. But this is like my favorite pastime. This is my golf, if you will.
Yeah, and you've and some other people have kind of rubbed off on me, so I've dabbled a little bit into the game realm. I'm somebody who hasn't played games from the simple stuff like Yahtzee to the more complex, deep world of board games since I was a kid. Like I remember doing that on summers in 5th grade, and I don't think I played a board game for 20 years. And I think a lot of my connotations with board games were always Dungeons and Dragons and like, that's weird. Those people are weird. I don't get it. But now after having done it some this summer and starting to more and more, it's fun because it's for me, it's filled a void in my life. Before, when I would wind down at night with my wife, we'd watch a movie or something, and we've really gone away from sitting down and watching Netflix or Hulu, and we've gone to playing board games. And I think it's helped with our relationship, and it's not just two people doing the same thing near each other. It's two people doing something together that are more engaged. And that's really been my draw with it, because you play the game and the game is fun. The game's engaging. That's keeping part of your mind going, but then you're also conversing along with it. And that itself is good and healthy and fun.
Yeah. For me, like when I'm playing board games, the way my mind works, like pretty much from the moment I get up until the moment I get done of an afternoon or an evening, and ends honestly sometimes even into the evening, not with business stuff, but more personal stuff. Like my mind just goes. Multiple thoughts running through my head simultaneously all day long. When I sit down and play a board game, I have complete undivided attention. I'm completely engrossed in what I'm doing. And I find that like it totally relaxes me because I get all that other stuff out of my head. And again, I mean, I'm spending time with people that I care about or friends that I know. Like, I don't know, for me, it's just a really good time. And, games don't cost a terrible amount of money. So it's pretty inexpensive entertainment. There's, unlike going to a movie, you can play the same game multiple times, and it's just something I really enjoy. If you could promise me that I could go start another business and do a retail board game store and that like it wouldn't fail, it'd be profitable, I would do that tomorrow. Like that's how much I love games.
Yeah, I like the idea of having it be, it's interactive. You're participating in it versus it being served at you. You're listening to this podcast, you're watching a movie, or when you're playing a game, you're participating in the game and you're present there. One thing you mentioned about shutting everything else off, I mean, that's one struggle I have. And I've talked to enough entrepreneurs now to know that this is a big struggle for a lot of entrepreneurs, is to shut off what's going on in the business. And while you can be sitting with somebody, your family, your wife, whoever, friends, your mind might be elsewhere. So I was talking about being present physically, but also present mentally. And by engaging in a task that I think taps into your brain and forces it to work, it does help me shut it off as well. I'm not going to say it works 100% foolproof, but it definitely shuts it off a lot more than if I just go watch TV.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's because, like, particularly with some of the more complex Euro-style games, like, you can't turn your attention away from it. If I'm competitive, I want to win. I mean, mostly I'm there to have a good time, but I want to win. So you're always, they call these strategy board games for a reason. And you go into a game with a certain strategy, and then you're constantly altering that strategy because of what your opponents are doing. Or in some games, like it may be a cooperative game where you're playing together with your friends against the game itself. There are a lot of games now that have a mechanic where the game is the adversary, and the mechanic of how it plays, like it plays itself against all the other players, and you're as a group trying to beat it. So there's a lot of conversation and strategy of how to go about that. And I just find like I'm totally engulfed, right? And it just blocks out anything else from entering into my mind. And for me, that's a very good thing. It's a very healthy thing. And, it's something we spend a lot of time doing. I mean, we as a family will go and watch some movies and stuff, but like a little bit with my wife, but mostly with myself and my boys. Like, games are where it's at for us, especially my oldest, Ethan. They both love games, but Ethan is like, he usually beats me at about everything. He just loves board games. He's definitely, been instilled from me from an early age, into playing games on a regular basis, and he's kind of really taken it to a level even beyond my affinity for them.
One thing I like about them as well is it bridges that age gap. Your boys are older than my girls are, and I can sit down and play games with them, and we can talk about the game. It gives a common conversation piece. And I think you're much more conversational than I am. I may come across as conversational because I do the podcast, but I talk so much on the podcast and with people during the day. Like when I'm not working, I really don't like to strike up small talk conversations with people. And that includes my wife sometimes. Like it can be tough to draw a conversation out of me. And I found that if we do play a game, like now we're talking, we're face to face, and it makes people like me that can either be tired from the day or maybe mentally drained from the day, or they're just not super people to begin with, it seeds a little bit of required conversation out there. And I find that whether that's with somebody your age or somebody younger, like you can't just have a hour-long conversation with most 5-year-olds, that it does bring a common bond, at least temporarily, to the table, no pun intended, to give people a chance to sit down when they otherwise might not want to. They might drift from the conversation literally or mentally, or you just say, hey, I've talked about what I had on my mind. I'm going to go get up and do something else, where if the game's on, you're unlikely to leave that game until the game is over, unless it really hits the fan.
Yeah, you're in it till the end. And the great thing about games is we've got games that if someone's never played it before, I can show them how to play it in 5 minutes, and 20 minutes later that game is over. Anything from 2 players to 5 or 6 players. There are games we have that kids as young as 6, 7, 8 years old can get involved with. All the way up to things that literally can take all day. I mentioned New Year's Day, and gosh, this has probably been 6, 7 years ago. I had myself and then 6 of my buddies actually came down to my house. We hosted that year, and we played basically what's recognized as the mother of all big board games, and it's called Twilight Imperium. It's a game by Fantasy Flight. And this was a 7-player game that lasted 14 hours. We actually started at 9 o'clock in the morning, or actually 10 o'clock in the morning, and that thing went until like 2 a.m. the next day or something. It was insane. 14, 15 hours, one game, all in. And I think we actually ended up calling it, because it was pretty apparent one guy was going to win. So technically we weren't done, but we had to be done because we had to go back to reality. When you start a game early on January 1st and you finish it in the wee hours of January 2nd, you know that it's been a long day.
And that was honestly one of my apprehensions about really taking on gaming, was massive time commitment. Because in college, I'd see these kids camp out in the lounge at the end of the hall for literally, they'd go in there Friday night and leave like Sunday night. And they'd play games the whole time. And also learning the rules, like an insane complexity in some of these newer games. And one thing I've discovered from getting into this is the game companies do a really good job about this. A lot of the boxes on the back now have printed like this many players, this age group, and this is approximately the time it's going to take to play. And there's also some really good websites like Board Game Geek that I've used to sort games for just that. I want games that take less than an hour. I want games that are great for 2 people. And that has really helped because like anything in life, I mean, what you're doing has to fit your context. And if you choose a 14-hour game and try and start it at 8 a.m. the next day and you got to get up to do farm work the next morning at 5 a.m., that's not going to be a good fit.
No, that's not going to be a good fit. That's why those campaigns are reserved for winter for me personally. But yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there. Board Game Geek is probably one of the go-to resources. There's an online retailer that I like to use to buy stuff from. It's an independently owned company based out of Oregon. Actually, it's called Funagain Games. You can look them up at funagain.com. They have a lot of hard to get games. They'll bring games back from Germany. That is ground zero for when you hear me say Euro style board games. Like, Germany is it. There are so many games that come out of that country. And Funagain, they'll actually import a lot of those titles that nobody else does. And there's actually, in the month of October, the largest board game convention in the world is held. It's called Essen, and it's like 4 days long, and it's tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people over the course of like 4 days, and just hundreds and hundreds of new titles get released there. So Funagain, they'll bring a lot of those back. They do sell some other stuff through their website. They've hopped into a lot of games that are now on Kickstarter. So some of the best games that I've purchased in the last 12 months aren't coming out of standard channels. They're actually coming through Kickstarter. And, there's a lot of really neat stuff that's coming out. Technology has made it possible for a guy with an idea to put together a game, beta test it with his buddies, then, sharpen and fine tune some things, get a couple of prototypes made, have some more people beta test that, take that feedback, hone it again, and then launch a Kickstarter campaign to launch a board game. And it's just amazing, all the stuff that's out there. Honestly, it's gotten to the point, it's one of the fastest growing segments in our society. And there's now a pretty big trend among particularly people in their mid to late 20s and early to mid 30s who grew up playing tons and tons of video games are actually starting to drift away from video games and into board games, because I think of that interaction. We are at the end human beings, and we need human interaction. And it's just been growing leaps and bounds 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, when you say European style board games, they're coming out of Germany. What do you mean by European style? What's the difference between a European style game and the traditional game that many Americans grew up with, the Monopolies, the Clues, the Lifes?
Yeah, so those are more like a family style board game that we think of here in America. Those titles you mentioned, something that was eccentric and edgy for us when I was a kid was like Risk. That was a war game. Or there was Axis and Allies, which was a World War II based war game. The European style games, like, the genres are just endless. There's like dedicated farming games. There's a game I have, it's called Agricola, and it is all about farming, and you can raise vegetables, or you can raise grains, or you can raise livestock, or you can raise some of each. Anything you can imagine. There's just all these different things that have come out of Europe, and probably the one that really kickstarted it all about 20 years ago. The first time I saw it was a game called Settlers of Catan. And it was so unique because the board changes every time you play it. There's tiles that you place randomly for different resources that you gather. You have to have these resources to build a village, or to build a road, or to upgrade your village from a village to a city. And you get victory points by doing these different things. And it's, the first guy to 10 victory points wins. But the players interact. You trade resources. So you're helping yourself, but you're also helping your opponent. that made its way into the U.S. and into the late 90s. And that really kind of started this revolution, if you will, for the past 20 years of, again, these European style. So more pacifist in nature. We as Americans tend to do a lot of just like war games. And that's really just kind of kickstarted, family games, yes, but they're way more in depth than Monopoly or Life or Sorry or Chutes and Ladders or, something like that. They're a lot more intriguing. There's storylines to them. And it's just incredible, the thousands and thousands of titles that are out there now. Anything you're interested in terms of, age or genre or, length of time, like it exists. If you are into trains, and you want to play, a game with your kids, there's a great game called Ticket to Ride. And I think if your kids are 6, 7 years old, you might have to help them a little bit, but like that's a great family game. And it takes a little bit longer. It's probably 45 minutes to an hour to play, but it's a terrific game. It costs about $50. There are a ton of expansions for it. We haven't even talked about expansions where you have the base game and then these expansions come out to enhance or alter, change, put some twists into the game to kind of keep it fresh and different. All the way to something like Empire Builder, which is pretty complex and takes 3 or 4 or 5 hours to play. And it's, if you're not, senior high school age or older, it probably is a little too intense for you. And it's a pretty big time commitment, but it just shows you the depth of games and the genre and age brackets that they cover.
Yeah, for anybody who gets analysis paralysis shopping at the farmer's market because there's too many choices, I mean, this is one danger of the gaming world. I'm looking at Board Game Geek right now, and in their database, they have 102,000 games, 102,000. And when I got into this, I mean, the strategy I kind of started with when I started playing games again was I just took what we had off the shelf in our house already, which were the traditional games. We had Clue, we had Yahtzee, and we've had fun playing those. When I wanted to venture beyond that, it was like, oh my God. And the first step was I just went to Walmart and said, what's the most non-traditional looking game that they have that intrigues me? Pulled something off the shelf. And then one thing I like about this Board Game Geeks is they have these charts. So the whole database is sortable. So you can pick what game category. Like for me, mystery, like Sherlock Holmes type stuff intrigued me. So I found a game, Sherlock Holmes, made back in the early 80s, really high ranking, which is another thing I liked about this site that really helped refine the choices, because I'm like, I'm just going to trust the crowd on this. I'm going to look at like the top 10 games in the search category for what I've searched for. And I'm going to find something that's like 2-player, because it's usually just going to be me and my wife. It needs to be reasonably short, 2 hours or so. And then I'm just looking at the ranking and let that make its choice for me, at least in the beginning. Because while they are inexpensive compared to other things, they're not totally cheap. And I don't want to make a bunch of $50, $60 mistakes. And I also don't want to have 50 games. So each night it's like, well, which one of these 50 choices do we have? I'm kind of the person where it's, let's try and find the few that we like and let's play those for a while and master them and then go from there.
It's interesting you said that, because as we started recording this, I'm sitting in my office and I'm flanked by my board games. You've been here, you've seen them, and anybody that's watched the YouTube channel for Grassfed Life has probably noticed the board games behind me. That's just a portion of my collection. But I started counting and I stopped when I got to 50. We've got over 50 games. That does not include the expansions. So yes, my name is Darby, and I have a problem.
Yeah, and people watch those videos, and that's actually what inspired me to do this episode for fun this week on what is a holiday week, a celebrating week. Was people watch the video, they see the games, and they're like, what are some of those games behind you? What are your favorites? So just of the games there, you've mentioned Ticket to Ride, great for kids. Let's say you're in my situation. You want to play with a partner, and you need something that's a good 2-player game that works in about 2 hours. Do you have anything you can sell me?
Yeah, I think, again, Settlers of Catan, like that is a game that It's really pretty easy to pick up. There is a dice component to it, which, a lot of hardcore board gamers don't want a dice component. They want it to all be strategy. They don't want any chance involved. But, for a lot of people, they're used to having dice as an element of the game. So I think that Settlers of Catan is a great starting point, particularly for adults. I think if you've got some kids that are, 10, 11, 12 years old, they could potentially be interested in that. It's very interactive. Yes, you're competing against each other, yet you have to interact with each other. That's a terrific game that, honestly, depending on the dice rolls and just kind of how quick things move, like that game can play in as quick as like 60 minutes, possibly even a little bit less. I like having some really even quicker, easier games. One game that we have, my boys and I played a lot, and I play it with my buddies too. It's called King of Tokyo, and you're basically in Tokyo Bay, around Tokyo on the island of Japan, and this is like monsters. This is like Godzilla themed a game, and you're basically trying to get to 20 victory points first, or you're trying to kill all the other monsters in the game, and each player represents a different monster, and you're trying to claw them to death, and or get enough victory points. And that game can play in 20 or 30 minutes, and it literally takes like 5 minutes to learn. And once you've played it one time, you kind of have the base game mastered. There are a couple of great inexpensive expansions for it. A good game to start out with your kids, a really simple card game. And this is a lesser known game. It's actually an independent producer that made this game. It's called Treasures and Traps. It's just a card game. It's very inexpensive. It's probably sub $15. Your kid has to be able to read and kind of discern what's going on, because when you get some of these cards, they give you special abilities and effects. So they have to be able to read that and understand it. So you probably want a kid that's in the, 7, 8, 9-year-old age range at least to kind of comprehend a lot of that, although you can help them with it. That can play in as quick as 5 minutes. A game can take a lot longer if nobody can win. It can be a little bit difficult sometimes to get the stars to align to get a win, but I've seen it play in as fast as 5 minutes. I've seen it take as long as an hour. There's just so much stuff out there that there really is something for everyone. And if you're not sure, if you get on Board Game Geek and you're overwhelmed, go into a local game store. While there are a few chains out there, most game stores are owned and operated by independent companies. I mentioned Fun Again Games earlier. They have 2 physical stores in the state of Oregon. They've also got this online business they own and operate, but they've got 2 brick and mortar stores that you can go and visit. And they've kind of taken the retail board game aspect up a notch. They now have like food you can order. If you're over 21, you can get a ticket to get up to 2 adult beverages while you're in there. So there is like a whole, hey, let's go hang out and get a burger and have a cold beer and play some cool games with some new people at the board game store. So it's really evolving to more than just playing a game at home. And then there's another company I'll mention, and they're a board game manufacturer. Been around for a long time. Again, kind of German based. It's called Cosmos. That's spelled K-O-S-M-O-S. They've got a lot of quick playing 2-person games. My son and I went to Gen Con, which is held here locally in Indianapolis this summer. It's been here for 15 years. This is the first time I'd ever gone, as silly as that sounds. I'm 35, 40 minutes from where it's held, but the guys at the Cosmos booth were just awesome. Great company. They've actually got a whole nother business where they sell like science kits and math kits for learning purposes. But the game we picked up there is called Targi. Targi. That's a great, fun 2-player game. Lost Cities is one of their old classics. That's another quick playing 2-person game. They've also got a 4-person version they recently came out with, and something we didn't get because they sold out of it before we got there. And this is something I'm going to pick up online. We're going to take these with us on vacation because this is something my wife will play. Is they've actually started producing all of these different themed escape room games. Escape rooms are like huge, like physical escape rooms where you go and you pay a lot of money to figure how to get out of it. I know they've been around for a while, but they've really taken off recently. At Gen Con, you can actually spend up to like $500 to be involved in a big, massive escape room that they build this huge set at that convention. Well, Cosmos has started producing all these different themed escape room games that you purchase. They're like $20, and it's a one-time play. This is not a game you're going to play twice, because to figure it out or to solve it, like, you may have to destroy the box or rip the packaging open to find a clue or something like that. But it's something you can sit down, play with your family, and go through it together. And again, I think got like 16 to 20 titles, anything from like escaping the Pharaoh's tomb to, stuff in the jungle, like you name it. There's all these different themes. So it's really the sky's the limit. Again, anything you're interested in, there's probably, something to satisfy your vice.
Yeah, fairly recently, I got sucked into the YouTube rabbit hole, and I started watching these videos on, similar to the escape room, where you could buy these locks and boxes that you had to try and get open, and they were made out of metal. They were very artisan produced, and they're just these anomalous looking things with no obvious way to open them, and you got to figure out how to get inside at the end of the day. And in thinking of this and where this is going, I don't want to get too businessy, but I can't shut it off. And one thing I think about in all this is, you think about this space that's so competitive. Like, who would start a new board game now? 100,000 already out there. And you think about, like, the farming space. Who's going to start a new farm? There's so many farms, and it just goes to show that if you find your niche, if you build a following, if you create a good product, if you do your testing and marketing right up front, you can have success in what is clearly a very competitive industry when you start, or when you make the decision to enter it.
I would absolutely agree with that. There's kind of a big success, not kind of a big success story, like it's a huge success story. And it's a guy locally here from my home state. He's up in Lafayette, Indiana, which is where Purdue University is located. It's about 2 hours from me. His name's Isaac Childers. And, he had this idea for, we'll call it a D&D-like game. But he basically created this game from scratch. And it's a massive game. The shipping weight on this thing was like 23 pounds. It's expensive. It's about $140. And it is huge. I mean, now you can play it in chunks. You can play it in 30 to 60 minute chunks. But all in, if you go all the way through this game, they tell you to, it's probably 100 to 200 hours, right? So this is like a big, huge, massive game. He actually did this thing on Kickstarter, maybe 3 years back, 3.5 years ago. First campaign sold out really quick. They got that funded, filled it, came back at some point later and said, okay, we're going to do a second printing. We've made some updates and some upgrades based on feedback. We've enhanced things. We think we've made it better. Their goal was to raise $800,000, which even on Kickstarter, that's a pretty lofty goal. A couple of the games I've supported, like, they were trying to raise $20,000 or $50,000. So Isaac, the second time around, said, we're trying to raise $800,000. The campaign ended and they were just shy of $4 million on Kickstarter. This has been the number one game listed out on on Board Game Geek for a very long time. It was very hard to get a hold of a copy. It took a really long time to get that many games fulfilled on their second Kickstarter campaign. Like, it just does go to show you, like, well, how could you possibly come up with something new in the D&D realm, that dungeon crawl realm, and it do so well? But I mean, here's very recent history that shows it's possible, and not only possible, but like, you can blow the doors off of anything else out there.
What's the attraction around that game? Why is it so good? Is it the length of play? What did they do successful? And under the idea of why might people want to play that?
Well, so it's the unique parts of it are like you've got 16 different races in this game. So in any D&D game, you'll have a handful of races, and these are all like really kind of unique. Like you just don't have your standard like, dwarf, elf, human, wizard, right? Like he's got all these unique races that have very unique skill sets. You start them out base level, much like any other dungeon crawl game. You go on some campaigns, you gain experience points, you get some stuff, you get some money, you get your character kind of built up. But in most games, you just keep using that character. Well, in this game, your characters like have secret ulterior motives, secret things they're trying to accomplish. And once you get them so far, once you get them to a point, like they retire, that character retires. So you then get to open up a new character, which they're sealed. You don't know what they are. And so you kind of randomly get this new character that's a unique race with a unique skill set, and you have to start all over again. So I think that's one big appeal to this. And just the depth of play, but like it is, while complex, it's kind of simple in terms of how it works mechanically.
What about with card-based games? You mentioned one earlier. What are your thoughts on those?
I think card-based games are great, particularly if you don't have a whole lot of experience in board games, if you want something quick. There are a number of games out there that are referred to as a deck building game. So you'll start with just, 5 cards maybe in your hand. You shuffle those. Or you might start with 10 cards, but you shuffle, you get a hand of 5, and like that's what you start with. And then you use those cards to perform actions or to purchase new cards that will get turned up in front of you, and you get to add that into your deck. You're trying to make your deck stronger. And then at the end of the game, your deck will be worth so many victory points. And again, he with the most victory points wins. So a big one that's been very popular from a company called Rio Grande Games that I would tell people to check out is called Dominion. And you can get the base level game, and then there are like umpteen different expansions, and it's kind of a medieval set game. Again, probably kids 10 and up, I think, would be good with that. Maybe 9 years old. I think Zach was about 9 or 10 when I got that game. It's pretty simple, pretty easy to learn. My wife has played that with us a couple of times. It's not really her cup of tea, but it's simple enough that anybody can pick up on it. If superheroes are your thing and you want a great deck building game, check out a company called Cryptozoic and look for it's just called the DC deck building game. So it's based on DC Comics. There's a few different titles, but the original one comes in a blue box, and you get, Flash, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Cyborg, some of those more widely known DC superheroes. And again, it's a deck building game, but you're doing it with superheroes. So kind of the same thing as Dominion, but instead of medieval, it's Superman and Batman. That's a fantastic game. I think when I bought it, it was like $39, and there, again, some good expansions for it. Deck building games are usually quite a bit simpler to learn, and they will play a little bit faster. So I think those are great options for anybody that's kind of new to this. You definitely don't want to dive in with Gloomhaven or Twilight Imperium, right? You want to start out with Settlers of Catan and Treasures and Traps and DC deck building, stuff like that.
Are deck building games generally 2 people or more?
A lot of them are 2 people, but all the ones I've mentioned, they'll work with 2 people. They'll work with up to 4 or 5 people. That's a great facet. So if it's just you and your wife, that's fine. But if you have dinner with another couple and you want to play something that's kind of light and easy, like it expands very easily.
What's the board game aficionado's thoughts on the traditional board game, the games we all grew up with? Is it just there's too much chance involved because you're spinning and that's really going to dictate how you win. There's not enough strategy. Is that why those games aren't as familiar, or people just looking for something different? They've played enough Monopoly. They've played enough Clue.
Yeah, so I think, like, the thing with Monopoly is there's nothing about it that changes. The way games are designed now, like so many of them, Settlers of Catan I mentioned earlier, like the board itself will change literally every time you play it. It's just how the game is structured. A game called Carcassonne, which is a pretty simple game to learn. It's a tile laying game. So you start out with one known tile in the middle of a table, and then every player draws a tile blind, and you literally build this board as you go, but as you build it, you score points for different things you do. So it's never the same twice. And I think that's one thing that Monopoly has going against it. It's a long game. When I say Monopoly, people are like, ugh, I just signed up for 4 to 6 hours of something that I've played so many times and I know it's not going to change. Same thing with Risk. They're long. They're kind of tedious. The themes aren't unique. There's just such a wide genre now of options that, again, no matter what you're into, trains, comic books, tanks, trains, like it just doesn't matter. Farming games. I mean, there's, one of my favorite games, and I'd probably be hard pressed. Like if you said, okay, you can only keep one game. There's a game, it's about 10 years old now. It's called Puerto Rico. And it's a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth. It's a worker management. So you actually get like little workers you have to manage, as well as you are, developing agricultural resources on your little island map of Puerto Rico. And you're also building buildings, offices and warehouses and stuff like that. I think it's can't remember if it's a minimum of 2 or 3 players, goes up to 5 players, couple hours. It's one of my favorite games. It's again, it's kind of in that agricultural, resource management genre. And that's what I really gravitate towards. It and Agricola have a lot of similarities. That's something that really, sucks me in. I also like cooperative games, where you're playing as a team. There are some wonderful cooperatives out there. You're all working together to try and beat the game.
Yeah, I'm just starting to dabble into that space. I've picked up a couple games recently that I haven't played, so I can't comment on them. And I'd say the majority of the time that I spent this summer and, well, in the recent past with my wife playing games, we've played a lot of the classics, Clue, Battleship, Yahtzee, and I don't know, something about the nostalgia of those, it works. And especially like Yahtzee. I mean, I think the game we're playing with is my wife's grandma's, so like the cards were actually printed in the 50s. They have that old paper smell. And they still sell it today, and there's something about it works. Like very few products last 80 years or 70 years with the math. And we've had a great time just playing that. The games go pretty quick. It is chance, but there's also a lot of strategy involved in that. And I've really enjoyed doing those. It's, again, I think it's really changed our relationship, and it's changed my life and how I approach the end of the workday, from something that's just, let's collapse in front of the TV, to, let's do something together and really engage.
Yeah. Look, I mean, one of the reasons that, we choose to be entrepreneurs is because we get to, pick and choose how we spend our day, how we spend our free time. Hopefully we get more time with our family as a result of all of our hard work. Being able to unwind with loved ones at the end of the day is important. And, for me, I think this works. I think for a lot of families, if they would take time to try it, it would work way better than they think it would. You might be surprised. You might think you have zero interest in something like this, but once you get into it, it can really be a lot of fun. And more importantly, it helps you spend time with the people you care about most. And, really at the end of the day, hopefully that's why you work as hard as you do as a farm entrepreneur, is because you want to spend more time, not less time, with your loved ones. It's something I've really enjoyed over the years of working full-time on the farm. When we get into the crux of summer, June, July, August, it gets hot. Oftentimes we'll go out early in the morning and get all of our heavy lifting done. And then, around noon or 1 o'clock, we come in, we have lunch, and then there's kind of that heat of the day where we try to maybe do some tasks inside if we've got marketing or emails, things of that nature, paperwork we need to do. It's been great for me to be able to take a break, 20 minutes, 60 minutes, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, brew a cup of coffee, sit down with my kids, and play a board game in the afternoon. That's been a huge benefit to being able to work my tail off. And I think that that's something my kids will remember. Times that, Dad was working hard and farming was hard, but man, I remember those times when we sat down on the living room floor and had a great game of DC deck building at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I use the same exact strategy, and I think I picked it up from you. My two oldest girls are 5 and 7 now, and it's great in the middle of the day if we have a little bit of time to kill, or a window where my schedule, their schedule overlaps in free time to sit down and play a game with them. And we play the simple ones. My oldest daughter will play Battleship, but Guess Who, Candyland, Chutes and Ladders. They generally go pretty fast. My 5-year-old can understand them. And I agree with you. I think they will remember that, they enjoy it. Because if they ask, hey, you want to do something, and I know I only have 20 minutes, I'm not going to say, let's go to the park. So I have to find something that's going to work in that time, that is completable in that time. And these shorter form play games work. We'll do these coloring things that work. And if you actually want a longer game for kids, it's totally geared at kids and it's totally geared at girls. It's this LOL game. They have these LOL dolls now that are super popular with little girls, and they created a board game out of it. It actually takes a lot longer than other games to play. So if you're looking to stretch out your time playing with a 5-year-old beyond a game that's going to take 10 minutes, and you want something that's going to take 30 minutes and actually has a little bit of strategy involved in it, the LOL game has worked, and your kids will be excited if they're girls and you bring home something LOL.
Yeah. Again, it just goes to show there's so much stuff out there. And I think, we as entrepreneurs, we think, 30 minutes. I've got this I got to do and that I got to do. And man, when your kids are that age, if you spend 30 minutes with them in the middle of the day, to them, it's like you spent all day together. That just fills up their emotional tank so much. And it's really not that big of a sacrifice of time. I would challenge anybody who has the ability to do that to take time and do it. And maybe you push off those 30 minutes of tasks until after everybody else goes to bed, right? You can defer that until 10:30 at night when you've met all of your dad and husband duties, and the house is cleaned up, and you can go sit down and return those emails or do your accounting or whatever it is you thought you really needed to do in the middle of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I get business owner bitchy with the best of them, where I feel like I don't have any time. Everybody wants the time I don't have. But I have never regretted once sitting down for a short time in the middle of the afternoon to take some time with my kids to play a game or to color something with them. It's so important. You do this so you can be home, so you can have the opportunity, like you said. And I think too many people. I used to do this. It was the all-in approach. I'm either going to take the whole day off or I'm going to work the whole day. And I think games, regardless of what those games are, allows you to have a split approach where you can compartmentalize some time off to take a break. And I think anybody who's grinding out a full day, if you take half an hour, 20 minutes, an hour in the middle of the day, play a game with somebody you're friends with or a kid or a family member, you're probably going to be able to go back and do better work than if you had just continued grinding. Like, it gives you a little bit of a mental reset. And it's probably pretty hard to be angry at the end of leaving playing a game with your kids if you are having a bad day.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier, like, it's a total relaxation thing for me, right? I mean, everything else gets out of my head. And I find when I take time to do that, I'm more productive later in the day. My kids are now getting busy enough with school that unfortunately they're the ones telling me no. So I'll ask and be like, sorry, Dad. I got this chemistry stuff I'm working on, and I'm kind of behind, or nope, I really need to, study for my history test. So oftentimes I'm the one that gets told no. So I'm playing fewer board games now than I would prefer to be playing. But hopefully we'll be able to remedy that. This coming winter. If you're listening to this, the week of the holiday of Thanksgiving, again, go out and check out a local retailer. I mean, there is the behemoth, the evil empire, Amazon, right? But if you think you're going to be into this, or you're already into it, I would encourage you to go to a local retailer. Have one of their people in that store help you if you're not really sure what you want. Tell them, like, look, this is how much time I would have to play. This is the age of my kids or my family members, or these are the genres I'm interested in. They're going to be able to direct you towards something. I remember doing that years ago at a local board game store, and they're like, "Oh, so you guys you enjoy deck building and you enjoy comic book stuff?" I'm like, "Yeah, we've got DC deck building. We play that a lot." And they're like, "Oh, well, you got to check out Sentinels of the Multiverse." They're like, "It is legit," and it's so you get all these random comic book heroes that are basically, you realize pretty quick, like, they're kind of knockoffs of famous Marvel and DC characters, but it's a fantastic game. It's a deck building game. It's a lot of fun. It's a cooperative game. You play it with whoever you're playing with against the game itself. The game has the mechanic where you're battling you, the heroes. There is a supervillain you're trying to defeat. And I never would have learned about that had I not gone into a local game store. So just like local farmers want people to support them instead of, let's say at Costco or Whole Foods, local board game stores, local retailers, they could use your support as well. And you'll probably find that they will have some really nice incentives going on around Black Friday shopping. I know one of the stores we support here locally, they're more of a comic book store. But they also have a very nice board game selection. Rob and his crew up on the south side of Indianapolis at Comic Book University, they typically do a pretty nice discount on Black Friday. So if you want to get yourself, your family, your kids out from in front of a screen, which I think if you're an American, there's a 9 in 10 chance you probably need to do that to some level. Go get a board game. Buy your kids an appropriately aged comic book trade, something they might like to read. My kids have got tons and tons of trades that are a trade is, it might be a collection of 6 to 12 comic books that's kind of meshed into a thicker book. And they reread those. Both of them will break stuff out and reread it once a year, twice a year. So those could be some really terrific gifts that you might find benefit your family in multiple ways, headed into the Christmas season. If you live rural, and you're looking for an online retailer, I would totally direct you to funagain.com. Jeff, the owner, I have had the pleasure of getting to know a little bit, and terrific guy, terrific company, great online retailer, a lot of options that you're not going to find on Amazon, right? A lot of really unique, cool stuff. So check them out, give them some support.
Great advice. And it's funny how, we did a lot of this stuff as kids and then it gets lost in the middle. And then now we go back to it. And for people that maybe don't have somebody to play with all the time, do you have any suggestions for a single player game one person can play?
I mentioned Gloomhaven earlier. There actually is a method in that game to play it by yourself. A new game we just got. My son and I got to play test this at Gen Con. It had actually already gone through its Kickstarter funding period, but they basically did hey, if you come and test it at Gen Con and you like it, you can go ahead and kind of sign up post Kickstarter and get a copy of it at the Kickstarter price. Terrific game. I've been trying to get my oldest to sit down and play this again. We played it once at home. And I've been like, ever since I played it at Gen Con and played it at home, it's like, I want to play this every day. Big shout out to, it's called Mirror Box Games. They're actually based out of California. This game's called The King's Guild. And there is a single player component to that. I've not tried it yet. I don't know if it's good or not, but there is a single component player to that. You just have to look. I think Fun Again or Board Game Geek would be a really great resource to kind of sift through single player games. But I know there's a couple right there. I think I might be wrong. I'd have to look, but I think maybe even Sentinels of the Multiverse has a single player aspect, or maybe you can play two characters by yourself. So yeah, there are some ways to do this. I mean, board game companies want to live and succeed just like any other business. So they are really, really expanding, and you see a lot of variability of 1 to 6 players, and it'll tell you that right on the box. But they really do make it so it can be good for just one person.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. It's Thanksgiving week, Black Friday coming up. People can visit their local retailer. If you can only pick up one game, what is it?
If you're looking for a great, fun, classic, new classic board game that about anybody could play, I'm going to give you two. Because one is shorter, one's a little bit longer. The first one's going to be King of Tokyo. If you want a quicker, shorter, kind of zany game. If you want the longer one, though, it's really, really hard to recommend anything other than Settlers of Catan. You can get that in a local board game store. You can probably walk into any Walmart in the country and purchase that right now. It has achieved classic board game status in the United States. I think in another 10 to 20 years, Settlers of Catan is probably heard in the same breath as Monopoly and Clue.
There you have it, Darby Simpson and myself on Board Games. If you want to follow along with everything that we're doing, check us out at Grassfed Life. If you want to learn more about board games, be sure to check out BoardGameGeek.com. It is the geekiest best site about all things board games. It's really made my entrance into the board game space a lot easier. It solved a big problem for me, especially with those ranking systems. And when I was talking earlier in this episode about how board games have really helped fill a void in my life, that's no exaggeration. It's given me an activity to do with my kids and my wife that wasn't on the table, no pun intended, previously, and it's provided a great way for us to bond. So whether it's the classics like Clue or the newer ones like Agricola or Settlers of Catan, think about bringing some board games into your life over the next few months. That's all for this one. As always, thanks for listening to this episode and all the episodes that we do here at Grassfed Life. I really appreciate all the feedback, all the support, all the kind words. that I've gotten over the past year. You all are why I do this show. I want to make a difference in this space. I want to make a difference in people's lives, and this podcast is one vehicle that allows me to do that. Thank you for listening, and thank you for taking this information, internalizing it, and doing something with it. It's not always easy to take something that you hear on a podcast like this and put it into action, but I know a lot of you have, and you've ran down the field with it and done really well. I wish you the best of success into the future, and enjoy your Thanksgiving week. Grassfed Life normal episodes will pick up again next week. Until then, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.